This is the Today with Tally podcast.
And welcome back to the Today with Tally podcast, folks. We have another great show in store for you today. Look, today we are going to talk more corruption in the United States of America. Go figure, right? Free speech, retaliation, and the cost of integrity. You know, it's always us everyday average Americans that are just trying to call all this stuff out while the elite try to continue to rule the roost, if you will. But their day's coming. I can tell you that. There's more Erik Holts in this country that are beginning to stand up and fight for what's right for not just them, but for all Americans. And look, our next guest is a fire chief. He's a former fire chief. This is his story. In April of 2022, Erik Holt left federal service after 18 years to raise his daughters and accepted the fire chief position at a small rural fire department in Colorado, just west of Colorado Springs. Now, within a year, with the support of an outstanding board and dedicated personnel, Erik says, they transformed this department from 5 to over 60 trained, qualified, and dedicated personnel. Then came the May 2023 election. You're like, I thought this guy was a fire chief. He's doing really good stuff. He's brought the department from 5 to 60, and now you want to talk election? Well, shall we? For the first time, all 5 board seats were up for election. Erik received complaints from citizens regarding irregularities at the polls. Erik reviewed 48 hours of surveillance footage and discovered clear evidence of coordinated election misconduct. It's as if I've seen this movie before. Erik followed his legal and moral obligation and reported the findings to the DA. This is the decision that changed everything for Erik. The individuals under investigation were sworn in as the new board and immediately ordered Erik to give them access to delete all the surveillance footage that caught these folks red-handed and in the act. Now, he refused. Days later, they illegally froze the fire district's bank accounts, disrupting emergency services and payroll. Despite Erik's efforts to protect the department and its integrity, he was fired for refusing to destroy evidence. And this is what Erik says happened. Erik took an oath, not to a board, but to the Constitution. As a citizen, not as a fire chief, Erik reported the election fraud. He filed a federal lawsuit citing the First Amendment protections. The court acknowledged the misconduct, but ruled that his actions were part of his professional duties and therefore not constitutionally protected. The case was dismissed without ever reaching a jury. Now, Erik's words, this is wrong and dangerous. It sends a chilling message to public servants. If you report corruption, your constitutional rights may not apply. The court process in which he went through has uncovered grotesque corruption within the district attorney's office. Erik has exhausted over $150,000 of his own dollars to fight this corruption. And his case is now being heard in the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals. And with that, we have Erik Holt joining us. How are you, sir?
I'm great, man. You got me pumped up reading that. It's crazy. I've heard that so many times. I've lived it, and it's still crazy for me to hear.
And I know the area well. It's Florissant, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, I know that area well, man. I grew up running those hills from Lake George all the way, in through Florissant Divide. into Woodland Park and down to the Springs and all the way back up again,
Yeah.
So I definitely know that area very well. And, there's big need for firemen out there with all the accidents on 24 and, the snow and the wildfires. And so, I mean, it's a very, that job, that position, and having a department on the ready, at all times is definitely something that's very important, for that area. And so, look, you became a fire chief. Uh, Walk me through the service that you had prior to becoming a fire chief.
Yeah, I mean, out of high school, I joined the Army. I was fortunate enough to become an Army firefighter. It's a very small MOS or job specialty, as it's called. But I did 5 years active duty. I got out in 2008. I did one tour into Ramadi, Iraq in 05, 06. Did my 5 years active duty honorably. And I got out and I still wanted to serve the Army, but my MOS path in the Army versus what I could do on the civilian side working for the federal government um, just was a better fit. But I still got to serve my country, still got to work on military bases, and I served as a firefighter. So I did about 8, 9 years down at Fort Hood, Texas, and then which was a great department, great leadership. Uh, Eventually, I transferred up to Fort Carson Fire Department and did that for 12, 13 years. Loved it. I mean, just amazing group of people. But life just sort of changed. In 2022, I was going through court for a custody battle post divorce, and the court awarded me full custody of both teenage daughters. So, at the time, I think they were 13 and 9 or something like that, maybe 12 and 10, or I'm sorry, 14 and 10. And so it's just, like being a fireman is 48-hour shifts for my schedule it was. It just wasn't super conducive to being a single dad of two daughters, right? So I took the opportunity to look in the local area, and there was a fire chief's job. Um, Somewhat haphazardly fell into it. They had needed an interim fire chief for a while. I had started doing that during the whole court proceedings, and then once the court granted me that full custody, then I had applied for a permanent role there and got it and got to work, man. Worked hard. It was a big responsibility. There's 66 square miles up in the mountains, like you mentioned. I mean, it's 24 is a tourist corridor. You got everybody from the Springs headed to Breckenridge in the mountains. Um, High fire danger, an older population. We served about 5,500 people if you look at census data within that fire department. And I took over a department that was floundering. It was in chaos. Average response time was 18 minutes from the time somebody called 911 until somebody arrived. Of that 18 minutes, you may have waited for somebody that wasn't qualified to give medical care, right? You only had 4 or 5 responders at the time, taking 18 minutes to get to your call for service. And within 6 months of being in the position, I transformed that from 5 to 62 personnel. We trained them, we certified them, and our response times went down to 7 minutes. By every metric, that's what somebody wants their fire department to do. Um,
It all makes sense now. You would end up in Fort Carson out of Fort Hood, and you would take this position on in Florissant, up in the hills of Colorado, and that's just west of Colorado Springs. And dude, your mustache is a dead giveaway that you're a fire guy. I gotta say,
Absolutely.
man. I mean, if I would have just met you on the streets, I'd have been like, "Yeah, it's a fire guy." Yeah. So,
It's a stereotype for sure, right?
yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, you guys do it to yourselves. I mean, it's what fire guys do, right? I mean,
Of course.
my son-in-law is a fireman, and they all have that. They're all proud of that mustache that they wear.
Hey,
And
just dig it.
yeah. So you would come onto this department, you would immediately improve it. Like you said, from the from the call service, coming in to your response times to training personnel and really changing the scope and bringing in your new leadership, it definitely worked, what you were doing. So let's just get right down into it here. May of 2023, there's an election.
Yeah.
Explain explain what happened during this election. I mean, because like I said, you've already come into this department, you've turned it around. Things are looking up. Things are looking positive. The residents must be happy with your service. The firefighters must be really happy with your leadership. You went from 5 to 62. You have certified these guys and gals, and things are looking positive. And then what?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds simpler on paper than it is in real life, right? Success brings enemies sometimes, right? So, um, I will say that the reason we were able to achieve the, recruitment and the metrics of responding with more qualified people faster, is because at some point you have to enforce a standard. And uh, I came from the federal fire service. Fort Carson Fire operates at the tip of the spear when it comes to firefighting. And so I brought a professional culture and a high level standard to the fire department, and that pushed some people out. Um, that's what was best for people that had to dial 911, but it brings people that have a passion to hate on you. So there was a group of people that aligned with that, and they spun their own narrative, and they could get some people to kind of buy into the BS. But my job was to work hard and ensure that even if they were adverse to the changes, that it was in the best interest of people when they actually needed help. And that's never an easy position to be in, but that's why there's a fire chief, and there's somebody that is qualified and has been through the ringer over a career. And now, you got to implement that and kind of have thick skin. And that's what I did. Um, but I mentioned having, I took over in the midst of chaos and turmoil. And so in that process, created this situation where all 5 board of director seats were up for election in May of 2023. And so at that time, you've got this board that supported the vision and the growth, and then you've got this sort of opposing force coming forward that has now declared candidates, and they're campaigning, and things get really ugly. Um, and unfortunately, in America, man, there's polar sides that reality gets lost in. Um, the growth and the success of the department didn't matter to a lot of people. It was the allegiances, the tribalism between them. So May 2023 happens, and the incumbent board that had hired me and that supported the vision, that supported the growth, was all running. There was a slate of 5 people. They called themselves the like vote for one, vote for all. It was their campaign motto. It was very, very contentious. It got pretty ugly. My job was to not get involved in it as best I could and run a fire department. So right before, and I always give this metrics, the week before the election, I think it was April 30th, 2023, we had held a community event and a fundraiser for the fire department. It was the biggest one that had ever been thrown. Uh, Historical, they would do fundraisers like a pancake breakfast, spaghetti feed, or something like that. $7,000-8,000 was the high mark on fundraising. In the one we did right before the election, we had $27,000 in one day in fundraising. We had hundreds of community members out for events and a barbecue and all sorts of stuff. So literally the week before this election kicks off, we pull off the biggest kind of party and celebration of the department that the community had ever seen. Um, because of that contentiousness, though, there was some care given to how the election would be ran, and a law firm was actually hired to administer it because it's a special district. It didn't fall under the state or county's sort of jurisdiction. Um, the jurisdiction's still there, but special districts run their own elections, right? And the county can have oversight of that. Um, and because of the contentious nature, they just asked me to work from home and allow them to use the fire station as the polling location. And so the morning of the election, I showed up, I unlocked the door, let them in, and I left. I worked from home and responded to calls. And in the course of doing my job, responding to calls, I ended up back at the fire station that day. And that's sort of the transition into, the chapter we'll call election day. And if you want me to keep going, let me know, or if you got any questions in there.
Yeah, no. So why was it so contentious?
Well, when you have people vying for power, they will make accusations. They'll say X, Y, Z. They will spin your success into something seditious, I guess, right? So there was a lot of accusations made, and there was this. I'm very qualified in the fire department realm. People were saying that I was highly overpaid, but not qualified, or that the board was embezzling money. So when you hear that as a common member of the local, you tune in. Right? Those are catchy taglines. And so there was just this back and forth, sort of like the incumbent board was running on the success of the department, and then you had these other people that were making these accusations of like criminal conduct, or they could do things better, or their ideas were better, and they got their neighbors to back and forth, and just political rhetoric is pretty ugly in general. And I think at the local level it's even uglier because it's neighbors versus neighbors.
Yeah, and I'm very, familiar with Florissant, Colorado. And for the longest time, I always thought that this was a volunteer fire department. Is it not volunteer anymore?
It was predominantly volunteer. I changed the model where I had hired part-time captains from that were like professional fire department firefighters in other departments, and so we changed the model from like respond from home to a paid captain being on shift 24 hours 365, and then volunteers on shift as well. So everybody was responding from the fire station, not from home, and just had a higher level of training. And so it still is technically and still to this day a volunteer based department, but there are paid positions within that.
So the fire chief, so you were paid,
Yeah,
and then you had some captains that were paid. They were on the payroll. It may not have been a lot, but it was, at least something. And
yeah,
then all of your volunteers that you brought on, you went from 5 to 62 or whatever it may be, but you got these guys trained, and they're getting great experience, so they can kind of start building, their own resume, and then kind of journey out, as they
absolutely.
get older and get that, that experience underneath their belt in real time. And so you have this election, and this election had to do with electing a fire board.
Yeah, yeah. So this is one thing that I underestimated before this, and I've learned, which I'll come back around to, but how important local elections are, and how they interact with like actual people's daily lives. But it was for the fire department board of directors. They control the finances and the tax money, the tax revenue. They decide how it's spent, and their job is to make sure that it's spent to improve services, right? um, which is something that gets taken for granted a lot. That when you dial 911, somebody's going to show up, but the equipment that they bring, the quality of the training and qualifications of the person that arrives, and the equipment that they bring with them matters, and how fast they can get there. And I, all I can say is that I did a good job from what the professional standard is, right? Like every other fire chief in the world would look at the performance and what we did and say, that was a good quality job. That doesn't mean, Karen from the HOA would agree with that, but Karen from the HOA is not somebody in the fire service, right? It may be a school teacher, um, understand basic levels of civics, but they don't know the ins and outs of running a fire department. And that's what I was up against is schools.
Yeah, you have industry standards, you know,
Right.
in everything that you do. Of course, if you are in a large metro city and you only have, 6 square blocks to cover, that's going to be a lot quicker than, say, somebody who's got 66
Oh yeah,
square miles,
yeah,
and you only got a few guys to do it. And the majority of these guys are, running and gunning in their own F-250s, to
right.
get there, while they meet up with you. I mean, you could be 28 miles away and you're doing everything you can to get there. Of course, you've got Teller County sheriffs, you got Park County sheriffs right there, but still, at the end of the day, when you need a fire truck, you need a fire truck. So
Yeah,
so the industry standards do change when you are in a rural department with volunteer, or if you're in a fully paid department when you're running and gunning, in the gun and knife clubs in the cities. So continue.
well, I do want to capitalize on that point, Brian. Like, if you go to Colorado Springs Fire, their standard is a 7-minute response time because that is a national standard, and that was my target goal, and we achieved that. And I have the reports from that still to this day, of course. Of we achieved that in January, was the first month that we had hit that. January 2023, we had 7-minute response time on average call. Uh, on a 66 square mile. So there's some logistical figuring out to make that work, and we accomplished that. So it was a huge accomplishment. We aren't responding a few blocks away with that same standard, right, or the same time span. Um, but yeah, I always used to say, like, I don't. If I need heart surgery, I'm not going to the trash man, right? You hire people that are specialized in their career and have the experience to do that. And at a certain point, um, those people understand what the standards are, and what the profession requires. And so I used to get very frustrated with that stuff, right? But again, my job was just to keep my head down and do what was right for the fire department and to train and build firefighters up. Um, so, anyways, we back to election day, May 2nd, 2023. I was working from home. We get a call where we had to go to the guy's house. The call came in, I think, like shortness of breath or something, right? Um, get there, the ambulance service decides, he needs to be transported, and we needed to call medevac in. So the medevac landing spot is at my fire station where an election is currently taking place. So I, as the fire chief, leave the scene. I go to the fire station. I set up the LZ, and en route, we were in radio communication and everything, but the guy goes into cardiac arrest. So he went from difficulty breathing to CPR in progress, right? Ambulance arrives. We do everything we can for about 30 minutes on this gentleman. He does not make it. And that is a horrible thing. And it's always hard to deal with. But that is a kind of a normal occurrence when you're in the fire service, is that these calls happen. Um, but again, the chaos of being where there's an election happening doesn't make it easy. As the local fire chief, it's my job to now go inform the family that their loved one, although was alive when they left their home, is no longer alive. That is always a tough scenario to be in. But I go do that. And when I come back to the fire station, I had ridden, I believe, with somebody, the ambulance service medic, and I had gone up there. So I came back to retrieve my vehicle. And as I was leaving the fire station to go work from home again, a voter came up to me and they made a complaint, which was a very alarming complaint. Um, that complaint was, I was walking out of the station after casting my ballot. One of the poll watchers was ahead of me, and they were on their cell phone, which, just to be clear, is already a violation of law, right? So you have electioneering zones. Those and the poll watchers have rules that they must follow. One of those rules was no cell phones within the electioneering zone. Um, that, be it as may, was less concerning to what was overheard. So that voter heard them say, "Oh, did you pay them?" And then they kind of like tuned in and just sort of watched. Had taken a picture with their cell phone, so they're showing me this poll watcher lady standing within the electioneering zone on her cell phone. So again, pretty clear violation of what the laws are. But after she had heard that lady said, "Did you pay him?" She tuned in and was listening and said, "Oh, is this the vehicle pulling into the fire station right now?" And then motions two people from that vehicle over to her, gets in real close and tells them who to go and cast their ballot for. I said, "Well, that's extremely alarming. Let me take you into the designated election official, who is a paralegal for a law firm, right? That, again, all these precautions were taken because of the contentious nature of this election. Uh, I take them to that designated election official. I bid adieu. I go about my day. I had nothing to do with the actual election, so I just go back to working my normal day. Um, It was my last interaction and only interaction, I guess, with that election process, except at the end of the day, I went back to the fire station. I locked the door up, and that paralegal was there. We knew the results at that time. There were some anomalies in that, and there were some minor concerns on how that played out, but it really wasn't my job or worry. So I locked the door, told the paralegal, drive safe home. I went to bed, right? Um, Another day or two goes by. I'm in the local sort of market, and another person comes up to me and said, "Hey, I wanted to report something to you." I'm like, been upset by this, but when I went and voted, this completely different person, I was being filmed, and I don't like that. And I'm like, "Who was filming you? What are you talking about?" Like the poll watchers, like had their phones, they were filming me, and I'm like, "Oh, that's a concern." So I called the paralegal and I said, "Hey, I got another complaint. I gave this person their number, they're gonna reach out to you." And she goes, "Hey, we've gotten like a couple other alarming complaints, like in email or letters since the election. Our degree of concern is actually pretty high at this point. So, um, we're kind of looking into things." And I go, "All right." Uh, and this is where I say, like, I call this like the morality fire within. Um, Let me repaint this for everybody. I'm a single dad of two girls. My careers being a fire chief at this point. It's my only source of income. Okay. Uh, I don't want to get involved in anything that has to put that in risk, put my career at risk. But I had heard these things. And so after I talked to the paralegal, I was just like almost pacing around the rest of the day. Like, couldn't sit still. It was just burning in my head. I tucked my girls into bed after making dinner and, hanging out with them. And I go sit down on my bed and I just talk to myself out loud of like, the concerns I had heard were alarming, and what would I do about it? And I made a decision then that I still hold true today. And I literally just had to hear myself say it, like, you're putting everything at risk if you look into this. Are you ready for the consequences of that? And will you promise to see it through to the end? And I answered myself yes. I don't think most people probably think it's normal to sit and talk to yourself out loud, but it was just an exercise I had to do. And I'll reinforce that as I continue the story of like coming back to that and why I'm still doing this. But
You you were only at the department for 1 year before this election happened, correct?
yeah, and just over a year total. Yeah.
Right. And then when you were hired to be the fire chief there, what was the morale like
It
at
was
that department?
horrible. I mean, it was just a very toxic culture, right? It was just bad.
So so you entered a toxic culture.
Hmm.
When during the election, what would you say that the morale would have been at that time, just over 1 year after you were hired to be the fire chief?
It was a very tight knit, like large family. Like we spent so much time together. We did so much training together. It was a lot of young kids, like coming, not kids, but mid 20s was the average age. Um, and like just as a testament to that, those folks are still my biggest supporters that I still talk to weekly, writing letters of recommendations and telling me their successes now 3 years later, right? It's a very tight knit group of people that had each other's backs.
Okay, and this whole election would happen, and obviously, it looked like somebody was out for you. Is what the story is kind of
I wouldn't say it was out for me per se, right? They were out for control and power. Uh, I stood in the way of that, I guess, because I had my standards, right? So they wanted to control the fire department and whatever power came with that in the local community. Um, I definitely had haters, but I also had a lot of huge supporters, right? So that's typical of being in a public service position, though, right? Like, look at
Right.
any politician, any police, fire chief, right? You have strong supporters. You got people that, for whatever reason, think you should do a better job. So I was in a pretty typical space, I guess.
Okay, so then you say, all right, yeah, I've got to report what people are coming to me and they have concerns. You milled it over. You said, here I go. I'm going to report these concerns. What did you do?
So the next day, I go to work, right? As normal, put in my 8 hours. I go home, change my clothes, get in my personal vehicle, and I drive to Walmart. I bought some thumb drives. And from Walmart, I drove straight to in Woodland Park. You know this town very well. There's the company that uh, the board about a year before had contracted a security surveillance system for the fire station. It had two parts. It was how we got in, with our punch codes and our key card access, and then it had physical cameras. And so I went to them, and everybody would understand this as a FOIA, right? I said, "Hey, I need the cameras from March or May 2nd, 2023, from I think it was 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. I think was the time frame. Any activated cameras within that, please download and put on some drive for me." And they were like, "Okay." It's a public tax-funded business entity, right? So it's a public building. There's no reason to deny um, a FOIA request, and so I think it was the next day. It could have been 2 days later, but they called me back and they said, "Hey, it's ready to pick up." I went back in and I paid them on my personal bank card, retrieved the thumb drive, and I went home and started watching it. And this starts about 2 weeks worth of investigative, like, quiet work. I go to work, I come home, plug in the thumb drive contained four folders. Those folders were identified as cameras. In the On each folder would be 1 hour clips for 12 hours. And I like just sat down and started watching it. I didn't know what to look for, right? I was a fire chief. I wasn't a lawyer. I wasn't a cop. I wasn't an investigator. So I went on Google and I typed in election laws for the state of California or Colorado, um, specifically for special districts because there's some different nuance there. And I printed out the rules. And specifically, I pointed out the poll watcher rules because camera one was inside the fire station where you could sort of see the whole room. Um, the screens faced the camera, so like as a voter went in, to their screened booth, you couldn't see anything but the screen. But in the forefront of that camera, directly below, is the poll watcher table, and these are the ones that have been identified by the complaints of doing stuff that was unsavory. So I just start watching, and it basically, like, how it worked was I started playing hour one of camera one, and one of the first things I caught was one of the poll watchers opens a laptop, and you can see the screen because the camera's behind. It's recording the fire station. Well, the rules that I had printed out and had right there said no electronic devices, no recording, yada yada yada, right? And so I just put a tally mark there. I was like, oh, that's a violation. Boom. And then you'd see them on their cell phones. That's a violation. And so I went through 40 some odd hours of footage. It wasn't a true 48 hours because one of the cameras was only activated part of the day, but was a very important camera. And I'll finish with that. But uh, by the time I had gone through all of the footage over the course of a few days of watching it, I had that paper that I had put tally mark on, I had hundreds of tally marks, i.e., that's hundreds of law violations in one 12-hour day. And I said to myself, there's no way that that happens by accident. That has to be coordinated. And I had the daunting task of, all right, I'm going to watch it again because I'm going to see if there's coordination going on. And so the first thing I did was remember that complaint that I had gotten when I was at the fire station. Well, I knew the time of that because I had my call log from responding to the call. So I went to that hour on the appropriate camera, which was outside the fire station at this point, which we'll call camera 2. It is high definition video with audio. And so I find the person that had walked out behind that poll watcher, and I hit play, and I could hear the conversation that she had reported to me. Now, because it's outside, there was some wind. The wind cut over what most would consider to be the most important part, but like the did you pay them part, you can't hear that. You can hear wind chop. But the entire rest of the video and audio aligned perfectly to what that voter had told me. But you can hear her on her cell phone saying, "Is this the vehicle pulling into the station right now?" And she's looking for. So it confirmed a few things. One, she's on the phone with somebody that's coordinating off site, and two, what that voter had told me lined up. She's receiving people. If you're getting a vehicle description from somebody on the phone who's off coordinating, you're receiving somebody, right?
So, what did it mean? Did you pay them?
Well, I would say that that was the incentivization or incentive, I guess, that was getting people to come and do what they were told to do.
To vote for X, Y,
Certain,
and Z.
certain candidates, yeah.
Okay. How much did you ever hear, like, how much they were being paid to do this?
No, and so as soon as I kind of finish this part, I'll
Sorry.
get
Yeah.
into like why we never
Yeah.
found that out.
Okay.
Which is I wish I could. I mean, if anybody's listening is one of those voters, please come forward and let me know. Um,
I mean, and the other reason why I'm asking this is because this is small town America.
yeah,
And it's not like you're putting in a member of Congress or, electing some U.S. senator and or the president of the United States. And like, this is some really hardcore stuff, a county commissioner here. I mean, we're talking
yeah,
about a fire board.
right. Yeah,
So
you've got
I'm
the reins of $2 million a year, right? Like it's
yeah,
not crazy.
yeah. I'm just trying to understand the motivation behind a group of folks that want supreme power and authority over a small town fire department that they should, in good faith, would want a very highly functioning and reputable department to not only protect your county, but them as well if they ever need it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's no doubt in that. And I just to be clear to everybody, I have never heard the did you pay them part. I am not reporting that as a witness to it. I was told that. I didn't hear it on the audio, but I heard the rest of what was told to me that day, and I can see it. So I will say that 75% of the complaint was corroborated on that. Even if we take away the did you pay them part, right? There's still somebody coordinating off site, sending people to the fire station and giving a vehicle description and who these people are to somebody that is sitting there as a poll watcher. And in Colorado, it's very important to understand the candidates themselves assign the poll watcher, right? So you talk about a huge conflict already just in the way that they set that up. So although the catchy part of that is did you pay him, the rest of it is just as egregious. Somebody's offsite coordinating it and sending people, and then somebody that is under a oath and duty to protect the democratic process is then witnessed telling them who to go cast their ballot for. All of that is illegal. Um, and the rest of the scheme, Brian, was I once I had determined that like there was coordination going on, I looked a little closer. What they were doing to save everybody kind of the 40-hour synopsis, which at this point is 80 hours of reviewing footage, is I actually caught that the poll watchers sitting there were using track counters. So those circle little things that you press the button and it tabulates, they all had them, and I actually caught it on the film because what I kept seeing was like people would leave those screens and they would walk out and they do these like very egregious sort of like motions to them where it was like obvious, and I called that like the checking in with them, and then they would tabulate these votes, and then they would compare the numbers to each other and stuff. And I said, well, okay, that's enough to like keep count during the day, but that doesn't guarantee you a victory, right? Per se.
So they were just counting. So they had basically their own version of a live exit poll. They
Yeah.
knew where they were at, and they knew how many votes that they essentially would need to put X, Y, and Z on the board. And that's when perhaps when they were behind, they'd say, we need voters, we need
Yeah.
voters, we need voters. The coordination starts to come in, the cars show up, and then
Yeah, and so you could, if you were working in tandem, right, somebody could count the total number of voters, and then somebody else could just count the ones that people are checking in.
yeah.
Um, and I guess I didn't put it together then because camera 3 was actually just an engine bay where we parked a fire engine. But that day we had pulled it out, and they set up the table in there, and it was like it required a different set of like code and access to get in. And so that's where they counted ballots. And so when I started watching that camera is when I was shocked. I was floored. Um, the paid election officials, the actual officials that are supposed to run this, were there. They would unseal the box. They would start to count, and I caught the poll watchers was sitting right in front of her with a counter, and every time names would call, it'd click, and you can hear it on that, and you could hear the names. And I go, well, if I can hear it on the camera, the election worker can't, right? Or the election judge, the official. And then like a bolt of lightning, man. They read off like 3 or 4 ballots, and the election official goes, "This election's fixed," and they laughed about it as the guy is sitting there tabulating, and the other one's on his cell phone. Again, all of this is illegal, and I don't say that the election officials were in on it. I don't think that they were. I have no reason to believe that they were part of the scheme, but at a minimum, they were complicit in watching it take place right in front of them. And so the last sort of bit was on the third ballot count. Uh, Literally, they're sitting there just sort of shooting the breeze after counting ballots. 2 election judges and 2 poll watchers. And the election judge literally was like sort of bragging that the law firm, the designated election official, had briefed them to dot every I and cross every T and follow the rules. And I told her, "Who's going to enforce the rules? Not me. Not me being the official, the hired election official." And that was super alarming to me. But what I ended up doing was putting it all together, where the scheme was they were counting during the day, and then they had access to the official ballot count, and they were in there counting, and they knew the whole counts. And so go back to the final camera right after that final ballot count. One of the candidates, who's not even supposed to be at the polling location, walks up. 3 poll watchers meet him directly under the camera, and they detail exactly what I have observed throughout the footage of how they've been cheating, how they've been tabulating, and they tell him that he's going to win because they know the count. And it's on high definition video with audio. And so I reach back out to the law firm and I say, "I know I haven't talked to you guys, but I have found something extremely alarming. I need to show you what it is." And at the time, the incumbent board is still there, right? They're in their lame duck period, as everybody will understand it, post election, but before the transition. So I informed the board president and the attorney that represents the district and the DEO. And I go, like, it's very blatant and it's very alarming. I don't know what to do with this. And the attorney says, I need to figure this out, right? So this is where it's somewhat of a triad of independent sort of things happen. The incumbent president decides election fraud is taking place. She files something with the district court for a stay of the election and an investigation. The attorney called the DA's office and informed the DA as an attorney. And then I independently called the DA's office and said, I need to meet with somebody. I was super naive at the time. I said, I need to talk to the DA in Colorado Springs. They sort of laughed at me and they're like, "You're not talking to the DA." So I was like, well, I need somebody to call me back. This is what I have. So very quickly after, I get a call from an investigator at the DA's office, who is a post certified law enforcement investigator, works under the DA.
In
He
Teller
says,
County?
It's Teller and El Paso County is a combined. Those two counties are a combined DA's office and judicial district. So yes, but it was out of Colorado Springs, Fourth Judicial DA's office. But he calls me back and he goes, "Hey, like we've opened a criminal investigation on these reports. I need to meet with you like as soon as possible to see what you've got." And I go, "Okay." Like, so I ended up meeting him the next morning at like 5:30 in the morning because I had work that day. I had to do it before I went to work. So I sit down with him and I show him some of the highlights. Right, we met for an hour or two. I showed him some of the most egregious things, and this guy was like, "Holy cow, man! This is brazen. This uh, is so blatant." And he puts in his report, "It is clear to me that election violations took place on this day," in his police report, right? So now we've got a situation where these people are under criminal investigation by the district attorney's office. You've got a lame duck period of time right now going on, and the incumbent president filed with the district court that, due to a criminal investigation and reports of misconduct, she's requesting the court step in and stay the results of the election. But all of this stuff starts to take some time, right? Like if you file today in the court, they're not even gonna you're not even gonna get acknowledged for probably 2 weeks, right? So we're getting towards the third week in May of 2023, and the board, incumbent board, puts out a public agenda or a public memorandum saying that due to a criminal investigation and under statutory authority, they're going to delay the transition until June 10th. And this was on May 23rd. The people under criminal investigation that were declared the winners of the election lose their ever living minds and say, "We're seizing power. We're not waiting." They reach out to me immediately with a list of orders, basically, which really isn't how the board and the fire chief relationship operates, anyways. But the number one item was, give us the login and passwords for the security camera footage, and then it was like actual stuff that they should care about. Um, but the attorney was like, "They're not in power. You can't even entertain that, right?" So they're trying. It was very telling to me. Their first focus was, "Oh, that security system. We want that footage," and because we were declared the election winners, we have the authority to do that. And
So
so,
by now, here, Eric, let me jump in here. So by now, do these folks know that you went to the DA with these videos and with this um, evidence that showed that there was election fraud?
they knew I was involved in it.
At this point, how did they? So they came to you and said, "Hey, look, we want the credentials to get in here. We want
Yeah.
to see the videos. We want to hear it, and basically, we want to destroy the evidence, right?"
Yeah, it was very clear, right? And mind you, I'm talking to the DA's office, the investigator, and I'm talking to an attorney that's kind of advising me of how to handle the situation. And both of them affirmatively said, "Do not give that to them. Do what you can to play stupid." And I did well at that because they didn't even know that it was a third party company where because they could have gone, right? Um, they wanted it from me. I didn't even actually possess login and password for the system. So it was very easy for me to sort of play dumb too. Like, I don't even know what you're talking about. What?
Yeah, and really at this time, if you wanted to say, "Oh, sure, yeah, here's the login right here," I mean, I'm just saying, if you
Yeah.
wanted to entertain it, they make them feel like they did something like, "Oh, wow, we, went in there and we deleted all this stuff." I mean, that would have caught them in even more of a trap because you already have everything backed up on drives.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I just, my
I mean, you could have
job.
literally walked them right into the mousetrap, and but
Yeah.
still, we already had, or you already have the damning evidence there, and so the DA they start to build a criminal case, correct?
Yeah, I mean, we started into. I met with him May 19th, right? And so we go into the week. The next week is when all this pressure starts. These people literally come in and they say, "We've seized power. We're the ones in charge. You got to answer to us." Um, and they're just, there was just this empty space of like that would be determined. And so the incumbent board kind of just didn't resist because they said, well, either a criminal investigation or the court will figure this out. We're not going to cause more chaos. And like something extremely important in this is we are a fire department. So like 911 calls are going on during this whole thing, right? My job was to keep firefighters responding to emergencies. And it became harder and harder and harder to do that. So May 25th, the board president, quote unquote, the one that has seized power, shows up to the bank, unbeknownst to me. I have no idea about it. Poses that he has authority to freeze the bank accounts. The bank doesn't really question it because it's the local, um, chapter or whatever you call a bank, right? And he calls me. I have this recorded on. I recorded the phone call at this point because it was preserving evidence. Where he tells me he froze the bank accounts and that he's the only one that can authorize any payments for anything. On the recording, I'm like, well, our bill's going to get paid, all this stuff. Um, well, very quickly after, the local bank manager was trumped by the bank's legal department, and they were like, "Who is this person posing that they have some authority? We have no paperwork of that. We have no bank signatory changes, nothing." So they go, "This is bank fraud. Freeze the accounts hard. There's no access to anything." And he never notifies me of this, but to speed through what happens, like from May 24th until June 6th is just this weird sort of time frame where like bills are getting returned, light bill, internet bill, fuel bill, and then the big one hits, which was the insurance renewal. $23,000 bill on June 6th. They call and say, "Hey, you're not going to have insurance if we don't get paid." It was due on June 1st. Important to note, bylaws, policies, banking authorizations, and general rules and laws. I, as the fire chief, was not allowed to make any expenditure over $5,000 without board approval. I was not listed on a bank account as a signatory. Only the board, right? The incumbent board that has now sort of stepped aside is the bank authorized people, and so all of this melee happens. To speed through it, on June 22nd, I was fired from my job after cooperating with law enforcement. And the reason given was that the insurance bill did not get paid on time. Against my ability as a bank signatory, that I wasn't. I didn't have access to the system to cut checks. And the bylaws and the policies of the district meant I would have been in more trouble for actually trying to pay a bill that I wasn't authorized to pay. Only the board could do that, is my point. So they fired me for them freezing the bank accounts and bills not being paid. Because you can't say we're firing you because you're cooperating with law enforcement against us.
Who was in power at this point when they fired you?
The ones that had been declared the winner,
So
the opposing people,
right, it was the new board.
the new board, but they did not go through a transition. They just, quote unquote, came in one day and said, "We seize power. We're in charge. We were duly elected, and nobody can stop us." And in some ways, that was true because of a delay in the court and the criminal investigation going on. Um, to keep a fire department operating, I still think it was the best move for the incumbent board to just say it'll get figured out. We're not going to cause more strife. And the new board caused all of it. And that's really how it unfolded.
So if they fired you shortly after they took the power,
Mhm.
in what you would call in a very fraudulent way,
Yeah.
who did they replace you with to become the fire chief?
They eventually hired a guy. I mean, I've never
All
met
right, all
him.
right. So they hire a guy. Was this guy one of them? If you will, like Was this all part of the plan to get rid of you to install their own person that they wanted in there, or
I don't think so.
no?
I don't think they thought about it that way. I think they want to get rid of me because I was cooperating with law enforcement. They eventually, I think he came from a different state, and was hired, like a normal recruitment.
Right.
But that was like a year after I was gone.
So, all right. So their department probably dropped
Yeah, they went
100%.
back to 5 people. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Yeah. So,
Uh,
now, the day you were fired, did you pick up the phone and immediately call the DA and say, dude, we've got some stuff going on right here. They are retaliating against me. Dude,
yeah.
what do I do? And where's your case right now? Because these people are operating right now with zero consequences for what they've done. And you're holding on to the evidence. Like, where are we at?
Yeah, I did. So they posted a public agenda on June 21st, and it said evaluate the employment of Erik Holt as fire chief, right? So it was a pretty like obvious. And it's in the investigation file from the DA's office, which is public record. It says that I called and I said, "Hey, these people are going to fire me because I've been a witness helping you, and I'm asking for some protections as a whistleblower." Uh, I did get a call back from them. They said, "Okay, well, let us know what happens tonight. We can't do anything ahead of time. We got you," is what they kept saying. I had talked to these guys almost daily for weeks now at that point. Uh, and the entire time they said, just sort of get through this period of time. This is very blatant. We got you, right? This is pretty easy. And so on June 22nd, they fire me, for a made up fictitious thing, right? I call back, I report it. He says, "Okay, cool. Like, so sorry to hear, but we're still working on this." Okay. So my next thing is I called an attorney. I signed, and give him money for a retainer, and they filed a federal lawsuit, and that took some time. So from June 22nd, when I was fired, until July 14th, goes by. My federal lawsuit in the District Court of Colorado gets filed July 14th. 2 weeks later, they were served. I believe it was the 28th of July. The people that fired me get served with a lawsuit from the federal court. They then turn around and they hire a law firm. Okay, and this is where things get real corrupt real fast. Um, they hire a law firm called Vaughn and DeMuro Law out of Colorado Springs. 3 days later, I got a call from the DA's office. There was a guy that said, "Hey, we're ending the criminal investigation as a no file." And I said, "What is a no file?" He says, "We're not pushing any charges. Nobody's getting charged with anything. We're closing it." And I said, "How is that? Did you subpoena those phone records? Did you like it's on high definition video?" And he goes, "Look, man, you can request the file." And he literally hangs up on me. And you want to talk about devastated, man. But I still had this federal lawsuit, right? And this is where like the timelines shift a bit, but I'm going to come back to what just took place. I litigate this, I pay in an attorney. It's all procedure, right? I file it, they answer, they motion to dismiss. We partially survived that. They had one of the things thrown out for a jurisdictional issue. Then we do discovery, they file for summary judgment. 9 months after they filed, the judge grants summary judgment, saying in part that basically because I was the fire chief, all of what I did, whether it was off duty, on duty, doesn't matter. I was the fire chief. I'd be expected to do that. Um, and she said that I was the only one that had access to that footage, I guess missing the fact that I had to go retrieve this and all that, right? So my case gets dismissed. Totally devastated. My life has gone from being a fire chief living in Florissant, Colorado, in a 3,200 square foot log cabin on 8 acres, living a very good life. I have sold that home, funded this attorney. I am now living in a camper in my stepdad's backyard in Northern California because I have lost everything. I'm blacklisted from the career I was in, and I get the summary judgment, and I'm just absolutely devastated. And but Buddy, he owns a media company called Collecting Head Media. He was like, "You gotta just tell the story, man. I'll help you. Like, let me go on and make you a Facebook page. Just start recording the story, telling it. People will care about this. And I said, okay. And that attorney called and he says, hey, the judge got this wrong. You can win an appeal. And I was like, I agree. Judge got this wrong. Do you want to file an appeal? I said, yeah, of course. He said, okay, you got to give me $50,000 and then you got to pay me $4,000 a month. And I'll do that. And I was like, I'm living in a camper. I've paid you $130,000 to this point. You can't file an appeal for me, you know? And he just was like, no, I can't. And he throws his hands up. And so this is like one of those pivotal moments in life. I was so distraught, Brian. I was literally just like, I don't, just dark thoughts, right? Like not suicidal or anything. Just like I was just destroyed. Everything I have come to believe about being a good citizen in this country was just swept out from under me. But I'm eating dinner with my two daughters and my girlfriend, and we're at the table, and teen girls are loud and energetic, and they're doing their normal day to day thing, and it was almost it was similar to like being in Iraq when like an IED would explode. You lose your hearing, but everything feels slow. That's how I describe it because I was sitting there and I could see them moving and they're loud and screaming and I can't hear them because of this like heavy weight I'm dealing with. And I mentioned that conversation I had the night I decided to look into it, that I said no matter what it took, I was going to fight the fight. And I was looking at my two girls across the table and I said, there is no effing way I will ever let these two girls see me quit, like anything. So, although the road is hard, grab yourself by the balls, pick yourself up, and keep fighting. And the hearing kind of came back and my senses came back around. And I just had this renewed sort of like, all right, whatever. So, literally that night, I started reading case law. And I have no legal experience in the world, but I filed an appeal to the 10th Circuit Court on my own pro se. In doing that, this is how we get back to the DA's office. And sorry it took so long to get there, but I'm reading thousands and thousands of pages of case law and my court records. And something happened in the day where I had read two different pieces of paper completely on different, documents or whatever. But Cott Vaughn and DeMuro Law was the law firm that represented these people, and they took the case. It looks like on July 28th. Well, suddenly and without any reason, somebody at the DA's office who had not been on the case in any of the documents on August 1st, whose name is Andrew Vaughn, stepped in and ended the criminal investigation. And the two bits of information that connected was the spelling of Vaughn. Vaughn and DeMuro Law and Andrew Vaughn at the DA's office. And so I kicked that. I literally shot up in the middle of the night out of a dead sleep and was like, the Vaughns, they're spelled the same. And I was like, okay. I wrote it down on my little nightstand notebook. I went back to sleep. And the next day I called this company, Kinetic Investigations. They're out of Georgia. And it's somebody that wasn't involved in any of it, right? Is impartial. I sent them the info. He gets me a report back by end of day, literally. He goes, it's father and son. The lead defense counsel that I'm litigating against, his name's Gordon Vaughn. He's the principal attorney at Vaughn and DeMuro. Andrew Vaughn, the chief deputy district attorney, who had not been involved in the case, 3 days after his dad takes on these clients, steps in and gets rid of the investigation. And I was floored. Absolutely floored. And I have these reports, right? Like it's undeniable. And like I literally do an open records request at the DA, and he has him saved as Dad Vaughn. Like, hey, they're working together constantly. And I write to the DA himself, and I say, this is BS. This is a conflict of interest. This is a family tie and an impropriety in your office. I expect this to be, investigated. And he never does a thing with it.
So you're trying to tell me that within the DA's office, and a private law firm. We have a father and son working in cahoots, and he
Yeah.
never recused himself from this case.
Never even declared a conflict of interest, which is required, right?
So this is probably deeper than just your case. I mean, look, if this son is in there, they've got eyeballs everywhere in
Yeah.
an office that will decide the fate of this law firm, this Vaughn and DeMerrill, right? So you've got eyes and ears in places where
Yeah.
typically you're not going to have. And so when it comes to counsel, it seems like these guys are going to be leap years ahead of anybody else because you know what's going on. You're getting, all of the inside information and you're tracking these cases, and yours just happened to be one of them.
Yeah.
And once, father said, "Hey, son,
I got a
uh,
problem. Yeah.
yeah, you've got to cut this guy out." And so then what?
Well, I was always very cautious about how I talked about that. Okay, it's risky to infer that the DA's office does something corrupt, right? Um, it's risky.
Unfortunately, in the United States of America, you describe this case as chaos. We live in chaos every single day in this country now because the corruption has absolutely obliterated who we are as people and as a nation. So, you could say all you want, and I know you're trying to keep this very clean and clear on your end because
Yeah.
you're not accusing anybody of any of this stuff. You're just saying, "Hey, look, here's the evidence I have. I'll let you guys paint the picture and see where we go in court."
Yeah, I mean, I have been cautious. However, I got another set of open records requests, right? Because now you do one, you kind of know what to look for. Unequivocally, I will say, in my most recent, that took them 4 months to fulfill the open records request, which is absolutely asinine. Um, During the time that this law firm was responding to a federal complaint, a First Amendment violation, a constitutional Bill of Rights, uh, they were having to answer to the complaint filed by me. I
Hmm.
now have it in email that not only did the criminal investigation end, but as soon as I was notified, like within a week, I filed another open records request. Like, I want that investigation file. I want to be able to see what was in there. Well, 2 weeks, almost 3 weeks before the person that requested the open records request, I now have it in email, clear as day, that they sent it to the law firm 2 weeks before the person that requested it and was the party involved in it. So if you were filing an answer, like, so, courts go complaint, answer. They have to answer to the complaint.
Hmm.
While you're drafting that, if you have exclusive access to the investigation file to formulate that, that's a pretty huge advantage.
Well, yeah, that's what I'm saying. They had inside eyes and ears on it, so you know
Yeah.
what's going to happen. You already know the determination. You
Yeah.
kind of just kind of put two and two together and know what the outcome is going to be. It's all strategic,
Yeah.
but I still don't understand what the motivation is for a small town fire chief in Florissant, Colorado. Now we're talking big time law firms in Colorado Springs and DAs and folks not
Yeah.
themselves and father son. Like, why? Well, why? Wh- what did they? Again, what's the motivation here? It's not like you're
Yeah.
it's a small town fire
It-
chief position that you went in there and it didn't take you long to get out, a year and a half, whatever. But why? Well, what's the motivation here?
for me, was
No,
my motive. Oh,
no. What's the motivation between all of this
corruption. Oh, so I think
to get you
this.
out?
Yeah, this is the complicated end because
Yeah.
it makes no logical sense to anybody why some 80-year-old unhealthy, like, overweight people would want to commit crimes to seize control of a fire department. It makes no logical sense. And this has been the most complex thing. There could be stuff I don't know. Okay. I will say that there strategically, if you live in your homeowners association, right, and you control the fire district, then you get to generate that money to support your neighborhood. That's one motivation. But I don't know that that's really what it ended up being. I think what happened is amongst a quote unquote retirement community, they built up these walls of ego, and their ego got so fragile to win or lose a local election that they were willing to do anything that it took. And then once they took those steps and they were found out because of a guy like me who didn't ignore my best interest was to do nothing that I did, right? I could have just ignored everything, played the game, kissed butt, and still been a fire chief in Florissant, Colorado. But I have higher morals than that. And so when I start cooperating with law enforcement, panic sets in and you start to do dumber and dumber stuff. And then you're so deep into it, you can't get out. Um, and luckily for these people, I mean, talk about a huge run of luck that you can hire a law firm where the guy's son works at the DA's office to make sure you don't get criminally charged, right? But then you're spending taxpayer money on this stuff.
So here, the story here, it doesn't look. You have a small town department.
Yeah,
Okay. They pay a law firm.
yeah,
Why would a large law firm stick their neck out to defend this small town fire department and literally have a father son? So you were saying working in cahoots together to protect the board, the now
yeah.
duly.
Unless you're doing that all over the place, right,
But
Brian?
why? Yeah. See, again, that's the story here because
Yeah,
you have somebody with inside the DA's office, and then you have a large law firm that are the same name because they are father son, correct?
yeah.
Okay, so again, that's the story here because if it's
Huge.
happening in small town Florissant, Colorado, who's to say it's not happening in other places? Look, if this
Yeah,
guy's
I won't
getting
speak to them, Brian, but I do
no, I'm
know
just
of
saying that's
probably
the story. Yeah,
another
I mean, look,
dozen cases that
yeah,
the father's law firm represents him, and the son was involved at the DA's office. Yeah, it's a
See that?
moneymaker.
See, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
It doesn't make any sense unless they're. Do you know? Were you able to file a FOIA to find out what Florissant Fire Department paid this law firm to
No,
to represent them?
no, because one of the barriers to exposing corruption is one, the people under investigation often have the authority to like cooperate or not. But two, insurance is a shield. And so they literally have insurance that protects them from malpractice and all sorts of things. And so as soon as the insurance comes in, they foot the bill, and you can't, like, it's 18 different steps to even know who the insurance holder is, right? It is this blanket system to cover up. No public agency should have a malpractice insurance policy, an indemnification policy. Like if you do something against your oath and your bond, you should not be covered by insurance. You should be liable. But unfortunately, that's how the system is set up. Where
So you're trying to tell me that at the at the Florissant Fire Department,
Mhm,
where this check was written to represent this board criminally,
mhm.
they don't have checks and balances available for their taxpayers to see what they spent on legal fees?
They do have to declare in their annual budget, but once insurance is activated, so literally, like when I dropped my lawsuit, right, it gets filed. They send it as an insurance claim to the insurance policy holder, and they have nothing to do with it anymore. I'm truly at the end of the day litigating against insurance.
All right. So, did you ever reach out to anybody else at the DA's office and say, dude, we have a conflict of interest here?
Yeah, the DA himself, Michael Allen. I have been in contact with him. I put an open letter on X. He followed me, so I immediately messaged him. He placated, like, "Oh yeah, I'll look into this," And then I got a phone call, which again is recorded. It is out on the internet where the guy's like, "We can't see nothing here. We've looked through it. I don't see anything." And then I go back into the email records, right? This guy's name is Tony Joya. He's the guy that called me. So I search in all the emails that I've got a FOIA from the DA's office, Tony Joya. And what do I find? Email from Gordon Vaughn, Vaughn and DeMuro Law. Hey, come to our party, right? So they're all working together, man. It just at the end of the day, corruption gets so deep that like all you can do is come out publicly and put it out there.
So you're in court right now. You're in the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals after you filed
Yeah.
this pro se. Um, where are things at right now with this?
Yeah, so I do have Mountain States Legal Foundation that took my case. We have oral arguments March 17th. So next week I'll be in Denver for oral arguments. We are very confident that we will get an appeal victory, send it back down to trial court. I do also have a state case that I am representing myself pro se against Vaughn and DeMuro Law. And right now I'm waiting on discovery. They refused to answer discovery and my questions and productions and interrogatories. They got sanctioned by the judge. It is due this Thursday. We'll see some admissions there. So we're ticking along, but courts are super expensive. All I can do is continue to share everything. So everything that I have talked about to you, Brian, is on my Justice for Holt Facebook page. It's probably the best one. It's the most concentrated one. These videos are out there. The emails that I got, like I told you about the email where they said give us the login and password. It's on there. Every part of it, I only tell if I have something to show people in an objective way that they can draw their own conclusions. It's on there. So Justice for Holt on Facebook. If people listening to this want to support the legal fight to keep the fight going, to continue to expose this stuff, I do have a GoFundMe and a Give Send Go. Justice for Holt. You can search on either of those platforms. I would appreciate it. I've lost everything, so it's keeping it together and keeping the fight is a very challenging thing. But one way or the other, I told you, I sat on my bed as a single dad of two daughters and said, whatever this takes, I'll see it through. And that's what I'm doing, man.
So you're working for a resolution. You have two cases. What are you asking for in resolution one, and what are you asking for in resolution two?
The resolution, if the appeal court remands this back and reverses the summary judgment, it's case law forever. That will forever protect public servants who exercise your citizen duty to expose corruption. Often, executive, high level public servants are the ones that expose corruption. And if the court doesn't reverse, there's now case law that says it's okay to make up a story and fire them for exposing you. That's why we're so confident. We don't think that the federal court is going to say that that is an acceptable use of the First Amendment. They will remand it. It'll be protections for eternity in America. That's resolution one.
So we already don't have those protections?
We do. Lane versus Franks made it very clear in the Supreme Court ruling. However, judges still get it wrong, like in my case. And so when judges at the district court level get it wrong, it goes to the appeals court. The appeals court says, no, you got this wrong. It becomes further case law that supports, right? So I can only be a cog in that wheel of making sure other patriots and citizens are protected when they expose corruption. That is resolution one. Resolution two is honoring the terms of my contract, which was the money that I have lost because of the actions that these people took illegally. I won't retire, but it'll put me back to whole and cover my lawyer fees. So that's resolution two. But it comes, I can never put myself above my country, right? So resolution one is what's important. In the state case, the next chapter is determining their immunity. If they lose their immunity, which I fully expect that they will because they acted against the laws, right? But you have to clear that hurdle in court. The insurance still has it, but the insurance can then go after them civilly because they acted in that manner. So you can actually get back to the actual perpetrators if you defeat all of the immunity stuff, which is what I'm after, of course, because these people should pay the way they made me
Wow.
pay.
What are you asking for? What's
Like,
the sum?
so unfortunately, that's like super convoluted. Like, you have to pass all this stuff. I will ask. I had a 6-month severance in my contract, which they
Yeah.
did not honor. And then you have to kind of get an expert to say, this is what career earnings could have been. This is what
Yeah.
retirement, all that. But it stands at a couple $100,000 that you could win, and then the court can multiply that based on how egregious their actions were. Or I could win nothing. I mean, it's just kind of the stakes of everything, right? Unfortunately, you can throw out a number, but it means nothing. They'll challenge that, or they'll say they don't agree. And so at some point, you got to get an expert to put that number together. But you have to clear procedure to even get to that, which is where I'm at right now.
All because that one election day has completely put your life to a freaking meat grinder, really.
Yeah.
So what's Erik doing today?
Well, I had to start a new career, which I did. My kids and I have a home to live in again after it took us about 2.5 years. I mean, I was living in a camper literally across the country. Life's good. I will say this. Like, I've told this to everybody. If you're ever in a situation where you're up against the ropes and you feel like, oh man, this is gonna hurt me, but it's the right thing to do it unequivocally. Do it. It's the right thing to do. If we want to have a good country to live in and a good society, we need people to do that. I lost everything, but I am beyond what I'll ever deserve in blessings. My kids are healthy. They're on honor roll. We have a home again. I have a good job again. It just takes time. And that's just where life is. I mean, we all have battles, right? This was mine. I'm unfortunately not unique that this happens every single day across this country. And unless all I want to be is the example for people to say, F that. I'm not laying down, taking it. I'm saving this country. And that's my mission, man.
This is the Today with Tally podcast.